I only had $50 left. Not for the week, for the rest of my life. I stared at my cracked phone, thumb hovering over a contact named Rick. Rick was a loan shark, the kind who broke legs over late payments. My daughter Maya shivered on a moldy mattress, her fever burning hot. The silence after the message felt heavier than the cold room. The radiator had died days ago, and the air bit like ice. Silence here wasn't peace, it was failure echoing back at me. My hand trembled, scarred from the accident that ruined my life. Once a carpenter, now just a man surviving his own collapse. "Daddy?" Maya's weak voice cut through the dark. I rushed to her, my knees cracking as I knelt beside her. Her skin burned under my touch, her breathing uneven. "Is Mommy coming back?" she whispered through fever dreams. My chest twisted at the question I couldn't answer. "Not tonight, sweetheart. But I'm getting you medicine. I promise." I paced the tiny room, staring at unpaid bills and empty shelves, Friday night and eviction waiting by Monday morning. My phone buzzed, I jumped and grabbed it fast. But the reply wasn't from Rick, it was from a stranger. "Who is this? Why are you begging for $50? I blinked, realizing I'd texted the wrong number. Frustration hit me, sharp and bitter. I almost deleted the thread, but my battery flashed 2%. Then another message came. "Talk to me." Not mocking, serious, direct. Like they meant it. I looked at Maya, barely conscious, fading in front of me. I had nothing left to lose, not even my pride. So I told the stranger everything. About the accident, my wife, the bills, and the fear. "I don't want to bury my daughter," I typed. The words felt like ripping something out of my chest. 1% battery. The phone flickered. Then a reply. "Where are you?" "Send your address." I hesitated, but fear had already taken everything from me, so I sent it, and the phone died. Darkness swallowed the room completely. All that remained was Maya's fragile breathing. I must have drifted into a restless sleep. Dreams of better days, sunlight, work, and my wife's laughter. I woke up to blinding white light flooding the window. Outside, black vehicles lined the street like a military operation. Men in suits moved with precision, controlled and silent. Then she stepped out of the car. Tall, composed, powerful, like she owned reality itself. She looked at her device, then straight up at me. Our eyes met and she walked toward the building. Moments later, the door downstairs was forced open. Heavy footsteps climbed steadily toward my apartment. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp strikes that felt like fate arriving. I opened the door, blinded by flashlight beams. The woman stood there, calm and commanding. "Elias Thorne?" she asked. I managed to say, but she ignored the question and stepped inside. Her eyes scanned everything poverty laid bare. Then they stopped on Maya. Something shifted in her expression, just for a second. Then she turned back to me, composed again. "You asked for $50, she said flatly. I swallowed hard. It was a mistake. My name is Elena Vance. The name hit like thunder, a billionaire. Standing in my broken apartment. "And you," she said, stepping closer, "made a very important mistake." She turned to her team. "Bring the medical kit. Call the pilot," she added without hesitation. "We leave in 20 minutes. Wait, what are you doing?" I panicked. Her eyes dropped to my damaged hand. "You're the only one who can open a door I need." Before I could react, they lifted Maya onto a gurney. My world spun out of control in seconds. Elena leaned close, her voice almost gentle. "You wanted a miracle." I delivered it. She pressed a crisp $50 bill into my hand. But in my world, miracles are never free. Most people fear a knock at the door at midnight. In my neighborhood, a midnight knock means the police or a debt collector. But when I opened that door, the hallway didn't smell like cigarettes and rot anymore. It smelled like expensive perfume and power. Elena Vance stood there, her eyes scanning my face with a terrifying intensity. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like she was conducting an autopsy on my soul. "You're late, Elias," she said, as if we'd had an appointment for years. "And your daughter is running out of time." The air in the room changed the moment she crossed the threshold. It was as if the gravity of her presence pushed back the shadows of my failure. Behind her, the 2 men in suits moved with a clinical efficiency that made my heart race. They didn't look like guards. They look like shadows in human form. Wait, you can't just... I started, my voice cracking, but Elena didn't even look at me. She was already at Maya's bedside. The contrast was staggering. Here was a woman whose face was etched into the glass and steel of the city's skyline, kneeling on a stained flea market mattress. Her charcoal coat fanned out over the linoleum floor like a dark wingspan. She reached out, her gloved hand moving with surprising gentleness to brush a damp strand of hair from Maya's forehead. "She's in stage 3 respiratory distress," Elena said, her voice dropping the corporate edge for a moment. She looked over her shoulder at one of the men. "Marcus, the nebulizer and the Greta antipyretics now." "Who are you people?" I shouted, my desperation finally boiling over into anger. I stepped between them, my good hand balled into a fist, my scarred hand trembling at my side. "This isn't a hospital. You can't just burst into my home and start injecting things into my daughter." Elena stood up slowly. She was shorter than me, but she felt like a mountain. "Elias, look at this room," she said, her voice a cold splash of reality. "You have no heat. You have no medicine. You have a cracked phone that's currently dead on the floor. In 10 minutes, your daughter's fever will reach 105 degrees. Her brain will begin to swell. In 20 minutes, she'd be a memory. Is your pride worth her life?" I felt the air leave my lungs. The anger vanished, replaced by a hollow, aching shame. She was right. I was a man standing in the ruins of my life, trying to defend the dust. "Please," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "Just help her." For the next 45 minutes, my tiny studio apartment became a high-tech triage center. It was a surreal fever dream. The man named Marcus opened the silver briefcase, revealing rows of vials and equipment that looked like they belonged on a spaceship, not in a slum. They worked in total silence, the only sound being the soft hiss of a portable nebulizer and the rhythmic beep of a pulse oximeter they'd clipped to Maya's small finger. I sat on the single wooden chair we owned, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I watched as Elena Vance, the woman who commanded boards of directors and shaped global markets, sat on the floor and held my daughter's hand. She didn't look disgusted by the mold on the walls or the smell of poverty. She looked focused. Intently, strangely focused. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "The wrong number? You could have just sent a wire transfer. You could have sent a doctor. Why come here? Why you?" Elena didn't look up. She was watching the monitor as Maya's heart rate began to stabilize. "Because I know this room, Elias," she said softly. I frowned. "You've never been to this neighborhood in your life." "Not this room," she clarified, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were a piercing, icy blue, but they were shadowed with something old and heavy. "But I've lived in rooms like it. My father didn't start with $1 billion. He started with a debt he couldn't pay and a daughter he couldn't feed. I remember the sound of a radiator dying in the middle of a New York winter. I remember the taste of cold crackers for dinner." She stood up, smoothing her coat. The clinical coldness had returned, masking the brief flash of humanity. "But more importantly, I came because you are a thorn. And the thorns don't just disappear, no matter how hard they try to bury themselves." I stood up, the floorboards creaking under my weight. "What does that mean? My father was a carpenter. I'm a carpenter. We're just people." Elena walked over to the window, looking out at the black SUVs idling in the street. "Your father, Thomas Thorne, wasn't just a carpenter, Elias. He was a genius who grew tired of the world's greed. He worked for my father 30 years ago on a project that should have ended poverty, ended the energy crisis, ended all of this." She gestured vaguely at the room. "But your father saw what my father wanted to do with it. He saw the price tag. So he took the blueprints, he took the biometric keys, and he vanished. He raised you in the shadows to keep the key hidden." My head was spinning. My father had been a quiet man, a man of wood and nails, of sawdust and Sunday mornings. He never spoke of technology or billions. He spoke of integrity. "A house is only as strong as its foundation, Elias," he used to say. "He's dead, Elena," I said, my voice shaking. "He died in a hit-and-run 10 years ago." "I know," she replied coldly. "I've been tracking the Thorne bloodline since the day he was buried. I knew that eventually the world would break you. I knew that eventually you would get desperate enough to reach out. I didn't expect a wrong number text, but destiny has a strange way of being efficient. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the linoleum. The medicine we gave Maya is a proprietary advanced tech compound. It suppressed the virus, but it's a temporary fix. She needs a full course of treatment at my facility in Vermont. If she stays here, in this damp, cold air, she won't survive the week. I looked at Maya. Her breathing was deeper now, the color returning to her pale cheeks. She looked peaceful for the first time in months. "You're kidnapping us," I said, the realization dawning on me. "I'm giving you a choice," Elena countered. "Stay here and watch her die in the name of your father's secrets you don't even understand, or come with me. Help me open the vault my father couldn't. In exchange, Maya gets the best medical care on the planet. She gets a future. She gets to never be cold again." I looked at the $50 bill she had given me. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. I thought about the man who had texted a stranger for $50. That man was a failure. That man was a victim of a world that didn't care. But I looked at Maya, and I knew I couldn't be that man anymore. If I had to sell my soul to a billionaire to keep her heart beating, then I would sign the contract in blood. "I need to pack her things," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She doesn't need anything from this place," Elena said, her hand on the doorknob. "Everything she needs is already waiting for her." Marcus and the other man moved in. With practiced ease, they wrapped Maya in a heated thermal blanket and lifted her from the mattress. She stirred for a moment, her eyes opening just a crack. "Daddy?" "I'm here, Maya," I said, rushing to her side. I took her hand, the one not clipped to the monitor. "We're going on a trip, to a place with big beds and warm fires. Okay?" She gave a tiny, weak nod before drifting back into a medicated sleep. As we walked out of the apartment, I didn't look back. I didn't look at the cracked walls, the empty cracker box, or the final notice letters. I felt like I was leaving a graveyard. The hallway was lined with neighbors, their faces pressed against slightly open doors, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. They saw the suits, the equipment, and the billionaire woman leading a broken-handed carpenter and his sick daughter into the night. We reached the street. The air was biting, but the interior of the black SUV was a cocoon of warmth. Leather seats, the scent of newness, and a silence so profound it felt like a different dimension. Elena sat in the back with us. She didn't speak. She stared out the window as we drove through the familiar, crumbling streets of my neighborhood. I watched the bodega where I'd tried to beg for credit, the park where Maya used to play before she got too weak, the shadows of the life I was leaving behind. We reached the outskirts of the city, heading toward a private airfield. The speed was exhilarating and terrifying. "What's in the vault, Elena?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. What was so important that my father gave up everything to hide it? Elena turned her head. In the dim light of the cabin, her face looked like a mask of marble. "Power, Elias. The kind of power that can rebuild the world or burn it to the ground. My father wanted to sell it. Your father wanted to give it away for free. They couldn't agree ... so they both lost." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "But you and I? We're the second chance. We're the ones who get to finish the story." The SUV pulled onto the tarmac of a small private hangar. A jet was idling, its turbines screaming into the night air. But as the door opened, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing by the stairs of the plane was a man I recognized. A man from my past, not from the world of carpentry, but from the day of my accident. He was wearing a advanced tech security uniform, and as he saw me, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. I looked at Elena. She didn't look surprised. "The accident wasn't an accident, was it?" I whispered, my hand tightening on Maya's blanket. Elena didn't blink. "Welcome to the real world, Elias. It's time to stop being a carpenter and start being a key." As the jet's stairs began to retract, I realized I hadn't been saved. I had been harvested. And the $50 in my pocket was the only thing I had left of the man I used to be. I thought the nightmare was over when we boarded that private jet. I thought I'd traded my poverty for a miracle. But as the city lights faded below us, Elena Vance turned to me with a look of cold, calculating steel. "Don't get comfortable, Elias," she said. "I didn't bring you here out of the goodness of my heart. I brought you here because you're the only person left alive with your specific DNA signature. And I needed to unlock a door my father closed 30 years ago. I looked at my daughter, sleeping in a bed of silk, and realized I hadn't been rescued. I had been acquired. The flight was a blur of silent attendants and the hum of engines that sounded like money. We landed in the heart of the Green Mountains of Vermont, far from the prying eyes of the world. A sprawling estate of glass and obsidian sat perched on a cliffside, looking more like a high-tech fortress than a home. Maya was whisked away immediately. "She needs the med bay," Elena said, her voice brook cold. I watched as nurses in white uniforms wheeled my daughter down a corridor that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. I tried to follow, but a hand strong and callous stayed my chest. It was the man from the tarmac, the man from my accident. "Easy there, Thorne," he sneered. His name tag read Vogel. I remembered those eyes. I remembered seeing them through the dust and the screaming pain of the construction site as the beam pinned me to the floor. He hadn't been a fellow worker. He had been a spectator. "You," I hissed, my good hand trembling. "You were there. You watched it happen." Vogel just grinned, a jagged, ugly thing. I was making sure the key didn't get crushed too badly. "Can't have a broken lock, can we?" "That's enough, Vogel," Elena commanded, walking past us without a glance. "Show Mr. Thorne to his quarters." We began the synchronization at dawn. My quarters were a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It was a room 10 times the size of my apartment, filled with every luxury imaginable. A refrigerator stocked with food I couldn't name, a bed that felt like a cloud, and a balcony overlooking 1,000 acres of private forest. But there were no handles on the inside of the doors. The glass of the windows was 3 inches thick, and when I picked up the bedside phone to call the nurse's station to check on Maya, the line was dead. I sat on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. The scent of the expensive soap on my skin felt like a brand. I was clean, I was fed, and I was utterly powerless. He had spent his life hiding us in the cracks of society, moving us from one rental to another, always looking over his shoulder. I used to think he was paranoid. Now I realized he was a sentry. He wasn't hiding from the law. He was hiding from a predator who viewed humans as biological passwords. At dawn, the door hissed open. Elena stood there, dressed in a sharp white suit that made her look like an angel of industry. "How is she?" I demanded, standing up. "Her fever is gone." "She's eating breakfast." "She's asking for her daddy, of course," Elena said, her voice devoid of empathy. "You can see her once we're finished." She led me deep into the bowels of the estate. We descended in an elevator that seemed to drop for minutes, far below the bedrock. When the doors opened, I found myself in a laboratory that felt like a cathedral of chrome. In the center stood a massive circular door made of a dull, heavy metal I didn't recognize. "This is the vault," Elena whispered, her eyes shining with a religious fervor. "Inside is the culmination of the Thorne-Vance partnership. 30 years ago, our fathers discovered a way to harness zero-point energy, a power source that never runs out. No wires, no pollution, no cost. It would have ended the age of oil. It would have made the Vance family the masters of the planet. And my father?" I asked. "Your father was the moralist." She spat the word like a curse. "He realized that if one family controlled the sun, they controlled the soul of humanity. He wanted to release the blueprints to the public, to give it away. My father refused. So your father designed a fail-safe. A biometric lock key to 2 specific genetic markers, one from my bloodline ... and one from his." She walked to a console and tapped a few keys. A holographic projection of a double helix appeared, 2 strands intertwining. "When your father vanished, he took the Thorne sequence with him. My father spent the rest of his life trying to crack it, to bypass it. He failed. On his deathbed, he made me swear I would find the Thorne heir. He told me that eventually the Thorne blood would cry out for help. He was right. You texted me for $50, Elias. $50 for $1 billion bloodline." I looked at the vault door. It looked like a tomb. I thought of the millions of people living like I had, shivering in the dark, counting pennies for medicine, while this woman sat on a secret that could save them all. But she didn't want to save them. She wanted to own them. "What if I refuse?" I asked. Elena laughed, a short, sharp sound. You think you're in a position to negotiate? Maya's in the med bay? She's being watched by men who don't have my patience. You will walk up to that door. You will place your hand on the sensor, and you will give me what is mine. She signaled to Vogel, who grabbed my arm and forced me toward a pedestal in front of the door. The sensor was a smooth plate of obsidian. Place your hand, Elena commanded. I looked at my scarred, mangled hand, the one that had been crushed to keep me on the grid and traceable. I realized then that my accident hadn't been an attempt to kill me. It had been a way to brand me. As my skin touched the cold surface, a blue light swept over my palm. A sharp prick stung my thumb, a needle taking a micro-sample of blood. Genetic sequence detected, a synthetic voice echoed through the chamber. Thorn lineage, 99.8% match. Vance lineage, required. Elena stepped forward, her face flushed with triumph. She placed her hand on a second sensor. Vance lineage, 100% match. Biometric keys synchronized, opening the Thorn-Vance legacy. The ground began to groan. The massive metal door didn't slide. It unspooled, layer after layer of interlocking plates retracting into the walls. A hiss of ancient air escaped, smelling of ozone and old paper. Warning, the voice boomed, no longer synthetic, but human. It was deep, resonant, and hauntingly familiar. It was my father's voice. Warning. Unauthorized synchronization detected. Total system purge initiated in 10-10 minutes. Elena froze. What? No. That's not supposed to happen. I have the keys. He knew, I whispered, a cold realization washing over me. He knew you'd find me. He knew you'd force me. This isn't a vault, Elena. It's a trap. The computer screens began to flicker with scrolling lines of red code. Images started to flash, not of energy formulas, but of bank records, shell companies, and the dark history of the Vance Empire. It was a data dump of every crime her father had ever committed to keep his secret. Stop it! Elena screamed at the technicians. Override it! Shut it down! We can't, ma'am! One shouted, It's a logic bomb. It's wiping the mainframe and broadcasting the files to every major news outlet in the hemisphere. Elena turned on me, her face contorted with rage. She pulled a small, sleek pistol from her waistband and pressed it to my forehead. Fix it, Elias. Tell the computer to stop. It's your father's voice. It'll listen to you. I looked into her eyes and saw the desperation of a queen losing her crown. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. He didn't give me a password, Elena, I said, my voice steady. He gave me a choice, and I choose to let it burn. A heavy iron shutter slammed down behind us, sealing the laboratory. We were trapped in the heart of the mountain. The countdown on the wall hit 9 o'clock. If I lose everything, Elena hissed, her finger tightening on the trigger, then you don't get to leave this room alive, and neither does your daughter. Just then the monitors changed. A video began to play. It was my father sitting in a chair much like the one I had at home, looking directly into the camera. Hello, Elias, the recording said. If you're hearing this, it means the billionaire's daughter finally caught up to you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to protect you. But look behind the third pillar, son. I left you something that wasn't for the Vances. Vogel moved toward the pillar, but I was faster. Despite my broken hand, I lunged, driven by a father's instinct. As I reached behind the cold stone, my fingers closed around something metallic and heavy, not a weapon, a remote. A remote that controlled the entire facility's security, including the locks on Maya's room. One more step, Elena, I said, holding the device up, and I vent the atmosphere in this lab. We all go out together. Your choice. The room turned red. A siren began to wail, not of an alarm but of a countdown. Elena's face went pale. This wasn't part of her plan. What is that? She screamed. The voice of my father echoed again, filling the chamber with a ghostly weight. To my son, if you are hearing this, the greed of the world has found you. The vault does not contain money, Elias. It contains the truth about the Vance family. And it's set to burn. I looked at the timer, 8 minutes left, and realized my father hadn't just built a vault. He had built a funeral pyre for an empire. The air in the subterranean chamber grew thick with the smell of static and ozone. Elena was no longer the composed titan of industry. She was a panicked child standing amidst the wreckage of her own ambition. She kept the gun leveled at my head, but her hand was shaking so violently the barrel tapped against my forehead. "Stop the purge, Elias!" She shrieked over the wail of the sirens. "Everything I built, everything my father built, it's all in those servers. If that data broadcasts, the Vance name is dead by morning." I looked past her at the monitor. My father's face was still there, frozen in a grainy 30-year-old recording. He looked tired, but his eyes held a peace I hadn't felt since I was a boy. He had known this day would come. He had spent his life living in poverty, hiding in the shadows of construction sites and rent-controlled apartments, just to ensure that this moment, this cleansing, could happen. "He didn't want the Vance name to live, Elena," I said, my voice eerily calm against the chaos. "He wanted it to be a warning." The vault door groaned as it fully retracted, revealing the inner sanctum. It wasn't a room of gold or glowing batteries. It was a library of physical evidence. Crates of documents, internal memos from the 90s, and chemical samples preserved in lead-lined canisters. This was the 0-point secret. It wasn't a miracle energy source, it was a devastating cover-up. The Vances hadn't discovered free energy, they had discovered a way to extract power from a process that poisoned the local water tables of every city that used it. They had buried the reports of cancers, the birth defects, and the environmental dead zones. My father had been the lead engineer, he had seen the first victims, and when he tried to speak up, Elena's father had tried to have him erased. "It's a lie," Elena whispered, her eyes darting to the files. "It's all a lie. We're the heroes. We're the ones saving the planet. Look at the files, Elena." I yelled, stepping toward her, ignoring the gun. "Your father didn't save the world. He sold it, and he used my father's brilliance to build the cage." Suddenly the overhead sprinklers hissed, but it wasn't water. A blue, viscous chemical began to mist into the air, the total system purge my father had promised. It was a corrosive agent designed to melt paper, magnetic tape, and silicon alike. "The files!" Elena screamed. She dropped the gun and lunged toward the crates, trying to shield them with her body, trying to save the legacy that was already dissolving into blue sludge. I ignored her. I ran to the primary console where the remote in my hand was humming. On the screen, a final video file was playing. My father speaking to me from across time. "Elias," his voice was soft now, the sirens fading into the background of the recording. "If you are there, it means you survived. I am sorry for the life of hardship I gave you. I am sorry for the calluses on your hands and the cold in your bones. But I had to know you were a man who understood the value of a single dollar, so you would never be tempted by the weight of $1 billion. I left a check in the center console. It's for $50. It's all I had left when I went into hiding. Use it to take your daughter home, not to a palace, son, to a home." There it was, a yellowed, handwritten check. Tears blurred my vision. All those years I thought he was just a broken man who couldn't provide. He was actually a man who was providing me with the only thing that mattered, a conscience. Scene, the escape. I turned. Elena was on her knees in the blue mist, her expensive suit smoking as the corrosive air began to eat at the fabric. She was clutching a handful of melting papers, sobbing. Leaving their queen to drown in her father's sins. The timer hit 2 o'clock. The mountain began to shudder. The purge wasn't just destroying the data. It was triggering a controlled demolition of the lower levels to ensure nothing could ever be recovered. I had every reason to leave her there. She had kidnapped my daughter. She had caused the accident that ruined my hand. She had treated my life like a line of code. But I looked at the check in my hand. "A house is only as strong as its foundation," my father had said. If I left her to die, my foundation was no better than hers. I ran to her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Leave it, Elena. It's gone. All of it is gone. It's my life." She wailed, her fingers blackened by the chemical. "I have nothing else." "You have your life," I roared, hauling her to her feet. She was dead weight, her spirit broken by the sight of her crumbling empire. I dragged her toward the elevator, the one I had programmed to bypass the lock using the remote. I found Maya's room. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror, clutching a stuffed bear the nurses had given her. "Daddy!" I scooped her up in my good arm, her small body shaking against mine. "I've got you, baby. We're going home, I promise. We made it to the surface just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. The glass fortress of the Vance estate was silent. Deep underground, the explosions were muffled thuds like the heartbeat of a dying giant. We stood on the helipad. Elena sat on the concrete, her hair matted, her face smeared with soot and chemical blue. She looked at the horizon, where the first news helicopters were already appearing, drawn by the massive data dump that was currently being broadcast to every screen on Earth. The Vance name was being dismantled in real time. By noon, she would be the most hated woman in the world. By evening, her assets would be frozen. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "Why did you pull me out?" I looked at Maya, who was watching the sunrise, safe in my arms. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $50 check my father had left me. "Because my father didn't want me to be a billionaire," I said softly. "He wanted me to be a man. And a man doesn't leave a person in a fire, even if they started it." I placed the check in her trembling, scorched hand. "It's $50, Elena. That's what I had when this started. You're going to need it. For the lawyers, or for a meal, or for a bus ticket to somewhere where nobody knows your name. Use it to build something that isn't a lie." I didn't wait for her to answer. I walked toward the perimeter gate. Tone, emotional, quiet, and deeply satisfying. We didn't take a jet back. We took a bus. It took 3 days to get back to the city. We sat in the back, Maya's head resting on my shoulder as the cornfields of the Midwest blurred past the window. I didn't have a penny to my name. The $50 was gone, and my bank account was still overdrawn, but for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel poor. When we got back, the news was everywhere. The Vance empire had collapsed. Federal indictments were being handed down. The Thorne Vance files had sparked a global revolution in environmental law. My father's name was being spoken in the same breath as the greatest heroes of the century. I didn't come forward. I didn't want the fame. I didn't want the reward money that people were trying to crowdsource for the unknown Thorne heir. I went back to the only thing I knew. I found a small shop in a quiet part of town, a place that needed a carpenter. The owner looked at my mangled hand and was about to say no, but I picked up a piece of scrap cedar and a chisel. With my left hand and my scarred right, I carved a perfect rose in under a minute. He hired me on the spot. A year later, Maya is in school. She's healthy, her laughter filling our small, sun-drenched apartment, a place that smells like sawdust and fresh bread, not mold. I was closing up the shop for the evening when a woman walked in. She was wearing a simple denim jacket and jeans. Her hair was shorter, and the sharp, icy edge in her eyes had been replaced by a weary kind of wisdom. Elena Vance, or whatever she was calling herself now, she didn't say anything at first. She just walked over to a table I had finished, a sturdy, honest piece of oak. She ran her hand over the grain. "It's a good foundation," she said. "It'll last 100 years, I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small framed piece of paper. It was the $50 check. It hadn't been cashed. "I didn't use it," she said. "I worked in a diner. I cleaned floors. I wanted to earn my own $50 before I saw you again." She placed a crumpled, sweat-stained $50 bill on the workbench. "I want to buy the rose," she whispered. "The one in the window." I looked at her, and I saw a person who had finally learned the value of the things that can't be bought. I picked up the wooden rose and handed it to her. "The rose is free, Elena," I said, smiling. "But the lesson cost us both everything, and I think it was worth it." I watched her walk away into the evening crowd, just another person in a city of millions. I looked at my hands, scarred, dirty, and strong. Sometimes a wrong number isn't a mistake. Sometimes it's a call from the universe asking you if you're brave enough to lose your life to find your soul. I picked up my jacket and headed home. I had a daughter to see, a story to tell, and a life that was finally, truly mine. Wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's what you have left when the bank is gone.